Good morning, all ACEs family. Welcome to Intentionally Act Live. I am your host today, Jennifer Fortune, Chief of Strategy of All ACEs Inc. So happy to be here with our guest, Beth Chandler, CEO of YW Boston. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. So I'm so happy to be in the host chair today, taking over for my friend and colleague Rico. So happy to be in conversation with you. So I want to share a little background for our listeners and viewers today. About how we came to be in terms of relationship. So, for those of you who don't know, my background is in public health. And pretty shortly after my undergrad years, I joined the YW Boston team as a community health worker and had a couple different roles, but all roles that really were about being on the ground and working with girls of color in the city of Boston, in schools, and a couple of different nonprofit organizations. Um, an experience that still remains with me till today, very much so. And during that time, in leadership was Beth Chandler. So, Beth, can you share with our community a little bit about your time at YW and your various transitions?
Sure. As Jennifer shared, at one point we had a girls' health program, and we were working with marginalized women and girls in a variety of settings. And for those that aren't familiar with YW Boston, our mission is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, dignity, and freedom for all. And so that's the mission of every YWCA in the country, of which there are a little over 200. And at YW Boston, when Jennifer joined, we were working on 6 different programs, including our Women and Girls Health program and 5 others. And about 3 years ago, we went through a strategic planning process where we really wanted to look at what is the impact we wanted to have in Boston, and really looking at the first 2 parts of our mission statement, which are to eliminate racism and empower women. And so at that point, we decided that we really wanted to focus our efforts on helping organizations create more inclusive environments so that women, people of color, and especially women of color can thrive at all levels. And so for that, we had to shut down several programs, one of which was our Girls Health program, but we have incorporated some of those things in our new program for middle school girls called FIRE. But for us, it's really about thinking not what's wrong with the girls, not what's wrong with the women or the people of color, because there are so many other programs that are more, I consider, deficit based, where we're trying to fix the people. And we wanted our stance to be, the people are fine. And what's wrong with the environments where they're going, where they can't be successful? So that's the transition we've made over the past few years. And I've been with YW Boston a little over 8 years, started out as vice president of programs. And then when my predecessor took ill, I was interim president and CEO, and then became president and CEO in I think it was 2018.
Thank you, Beth. So why don't we start with this focus on getting a lot more specific around YW's mission, right? So as CEO, what does eliminating racism and empowering women mean to you?
So, it's an interesting question, right? Because part of it is, what does it mean to me? But I'm really here at YW in service of the organization and in service of the people who entrust us with their support to execute that. So, fortunately, we're similarly aligned in that when we went through our strategic planning process, we really took a step back and said, what could that look like here in Boston? Because for a lot of organizations who do work, anti-racism work, it can look different, right? And so for us, it was really thinking about how do we get at the systemic issues? And so not thinking about how it might manifest itself. And that could be, disparities in housing, disparities in who's in leadership, disparities in healthcare. but what's creating those disparities? And so we really wanted to think about how do we get at some of the systems and get at systemic change so that we don't have these disparate outcomes. And so for me and for the organization, it's really, we decided we wanted to look at how do we help organizations truly make change when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and how do we help them build their muscle, build their capacity, so that after working with us, they've built the ability to sustain that work moving forward. Success for us is when we leave an organization, they don't need to call us back every year to support them in doing their work, and that when they look up in leadership in a year or two after working with us, they see a change in the composition of that leadership as far as what is the diversity of people within leadership positions, both formal and informal, within that organization. So that's what eliminating racism is to me. It's really thinking about what are the root causes, and how do we build people's capacity to actually effectuate that change, as opposed to saying, I have the knowledge, I know what it is, but not having the skill and the will to really make that change.
Thank you for that. I am wondering, given your internal transitions and your focus, at least while I was at YW, being very strategic oriented and really encouraging us on the ground to think big picture and remember that, we're not just in the silos of our individual programs that we were leading, but we're part of a bigger organization that is dedicated to this vast mission. And now, being a CEO who is charged with, um, you know, seeking out the resources to make all of this happen, I'm wondering if your view on leadership, your view on how racial equity and leadership merge has expanded or changed over the years in any way.
That's a great question, Jennifer. And I hope that over the years that my leadership is changing. I think people change. I think organizations change. I think, where we were when I joined the organization is different than where we are now. And so I think there are some things about my leadership that, that have to change. And so one of the things we talk a lot about at the organization, and I think we did it when you were there as well, but we didn't always articulate it as well, was this growth mindset, right? And that we should always be learning. And that goes for everybody in the organization. It's not just people, who've joined, but we all have to continue to learn because people change and the environment changes. And that's why as an organization, we had to change, right? We had to go from 6 very disparate programs to 3 programs that are really much more focused. And that was because in order to have the impact we wanted to have, we had to approach our work in a different way. And so I think, when I think about leadership, it's about part of it is what are your values and how do those come out in how you lead, but also how are you able to change and adapt because people change, times change. I think I have become a little more comfortable with trying to be with being a little more vulnerable, and that I think is a hard thing as a leader in general, and certainly was and is a hard thing for me because often you feel that people are looking to you for answers, and so it's hard sometimes to say I don't know the answer. And as a leader, it feels like it's counterintuitive to say I don't know. But I'm hoping that I've gotten a little better at that and understanding that I don't have all the answers, and I don't have to, right? And as an organization, we don't have to have all the answers either. But what's important is that we ask good questions and we allow the answers to come up from a variety of places. I don't want us to be an organization where people are relying on the leadership team to come up with the answers. I believe in a concept of shared leadership, which means that everybody in the organization has an opportunity to lead and to share. And the answers could be, with the person that joined yesterday or the person that's been there for 10 years, right? But we have to try to create an environment where everyone feels that their contributions and their opinions are valued. So I think that is something that I'm trying to do within YW Boston, and certainly has, over the arc of my career, been something that has been a change, because I grew up in a time where it was the people in the positions of power were supposed to have the answers, and I have been trying to unlearn that since I've been in leadership.
Hmm. I love that. This is reminding me of the importance of bringing humanity into this work, even as leaders. So I want to dig into this a little bit more. Tell us more
Sure.
about how you came to realize that vulnerability was a place that you needed to open up in, and what supported you in that journey.
I mean, it's going to be a never-ending journey, probably for me. I will say that. I think, you know, part of it was watching other leaders and thinking about people in leadership positions that I respected, and also doing the work that we do, and seeing leaders open up within their organizations about, particularly when it comes to racial justice and thinking about equity, leaders who were able to say to their teams, I don't have the answers. And I'm on this journey too, and I may be just starting on this journey and seeing the impact that vulnerability had on being able to draw people into the organization, as opposed to having people be concerned that the leader didn't know what the answers were. And so I think, being able to see just the value that, being able to be vulnerable about that, how that can really draw people in, and the importance of that, and for people to see leaders as human beings, is important. And I think, having seen that, having, occasionally, dipped my toe in that, and being able to share with my teams some of the things that I was feeling or thinking, and how, people responded to that, and that sense of leader as also being, a human being, having their own, challenges, is important. So I think that's, so how I got there in part. And, I think I rely on, trying, little bits, and trying to find opportunities where I'm able to share, and feeling a little more comfortable each time that I do that, is helpful. And I think I'm blessed that I have a really terrific leadership team who also supports me around that as well. And, I also work with a sort of coach therapist person as well. And I think that that's been really helpful. And I certainly would encourage others to do that. That was a big push from my partner, actually, because I was like, oh, I don't need to do that. But, it's important to have people who you can turn to that aren't always just family and friends, right? But somebody who um, can be more impartial, as you, to hear what you're saying and be able to push when they need to push.
Yes, thank you for raising such a critical resource. Love it. And I also want to affirm that those bits and pieces that you talked about, I feel like I very much experienced that during my time at YW. Certainly, in reflecting back on our relationship, in the beginning of our time together through the end of our time together, I certainly saw this emergence of vulnerability that you're speaking of. So I affirm that, and I thank you for that, because it certainly did help me as a employee bring down my walls, and make that personal connection with you that I very much thought was missing in the beginning of our relationship. And I now realize, like, oh no, this is important, right? Like that,
Right.
those relationships, that being able to not only center humanity at work externally, but actually be able to connect with those who are working side by side with us, is very much important. So thank you for bringing that. I'm wondering if there are any other values that you find
I was
yourself.
going to ask you a question, because I thought you always did a wonderful job in connecting with the girls that you worked with in the girls' health program. And so just wondering, was it easier for you in some respects making that connection with the girls than it may have been in the office? Just wondering how that felt for you.
Yeah, it definitely was easier for me with the girls. I think because, personally, I'm an auntie, I'm a godmother, and so very much so stepping into different schools and different, summer programs, I felt like I was that auntie and godmother stepping into these different spaces.
Mhm.
And so it was very easy for me to just immediately make that connection with my girls, and organically build that rapport, right? So yes, there were lessons that I was in charge with, right, for facilitating. But more than anything else, I wanted to get to know who I was sitting in a room with, and what was it that brought them to the space. What was it that was on their minds, right? I wanted to know the whole person, and I
Mhm.
that always assisted me and always made things a lot easier, because I also did recognize that, you know having an outsider come in for such a short period of time, even if you're interested in the topic, it's very easy to keep your walls up, right?
Right.
And so it was important for me to make the diligent effort to bring those walls down, because I know that I very much had the same stance, or at least once upon had the same stance. So yeah, it definitely was easier, um, but because of the personal side that I carried into my work, it kind of came natural.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if there are any other values in addition to vulnerability that you find yourself anchoring in as the current CEO, and as someone who is on their own personal racial equity journey doing this work.
Yeah. One thing that I have finally, it took many a decade, I think, to get comfortable with just being comfortable with me, right? And I think that, right, I know that for a long time that was a hard thing to do, and I think part of that was because of how white supremacy can make people, and I will see how that made me feel in different environments, and it always came out in the sense that I wasn't good enough. Um, and so even when I may have shared this story with you once before, I worked in a bank. And when I met with the manager, he was sharing how, I thought this was going to be the big conversation where I got to hear what are the assignments I need to be on, what are the skill sets that are important. And the conversation focused on what I needed to wear, how my hair needed to be, and it had nothing to do with my work ethic or my knowledge, but just, how I could be perceived within the organization, which was, make sure my hair is straightened, long nails, dressed a certain way. And then I started looking around the institution and I realized there was no one that looked like me in senior leadership. There were no Black women at all. There were a couple of Black men, but no Black women. And that, being in an environment like that makes you think, well, maybe there is something wrong with me, right? Maybe there is, because I don't see anybody like me in leadership. And I worked in several environments, and many of them there were many wonderful things about them, but there were also things that were challenging and not affirming. And so it took me a long time to get to the place where I no longer worried about what other people thought. And I think, a big part of that was when I was interim CEO at YW, our board chair at the time, Mim Minicello, said, I think you can do this. I think you can be CEO of this organization. And prior to that, I hadn't really thought about that. And I think, MIM demonstrating confidence in me, I think the board demonstrating confidence in me gave me the confidence to have confidence in me, right? And to say that I am going to lead. And I said to my partner at the time, I said, I don't know if I'm a CEO or not, but I can't be who Sylvia was. Her shoes were way too big for me to fill, and I would have failed dramatically if I was trying to be her. I said I have to be me, and I have to be comfortable in the decisions that I'm making because they feel true to who I am. Um, and that was really, a big part for me in being comfortable with who I am as a leader. And I'm certainly not saying that I'm perfect. Lord knows I am far from that. But I'm no longer worried about what do other people think or what are their perceptions, whether they're real or not, about who I am and how I am as a leader. But I'm comfortable with who I am and how I lead, and that's how I operate now. Is I have to be comfortable with the decisions I'm making, why I'm making them, learning from them when they're not the right decisions, but not worried about what other people are thinking. So that's been a big shift for me, and has been, I think, in particularly for the last few years, an important part for me and how I lead is to feel like I'm being true to who I am. Family's a big thing for me. So I have two kids now that are recently 14 and 11. And so it is important to me that I want to be around for them. So I will not go out and be at events now that we can't anyway, because everything is Zoom. But, previously I could have been out 7 days a week doing work for YW. And I was very clear that I wanted to limit the number of evenings that I was going to be away, because that's the time I wanted to be home with my family. And I think it's important, particularly for parents, regardless of gender, to see that you can value your family and still have a prominent role, and that those two things shouldn't be mutually exclusive. So being able to, prioritize the needs of my family is important to me. And then, as I mentioned before, this concept or idea of shared leadership, which is, allowing everybody in the organization to own the work that they're responsible for. And so it doesn't mean that you can come in and decide you want to be CEO one day or CFO and put on that hat for a day. But it does mean that we hired you because there's value that you bring to the organization, and we want you to lead in that work. And so if we're doing something that's focused on marketing communications, I don't have to make any of those answers. We have a marketing communications team, so they should help us lead in that space. And I'm happy to, provide the support that's necessary, but I don't have to make those decisions. And so I think it's important for me for people to live into their roles and to live into the responsibility that, we as an organization want them to have, so people can feel like they really have agency internally.
Mhm. Thank you, Beth. That self affirmation piece is really resonating with me. And I had never heard your bank story.
Mhm.
So thank you for sharing that. And wow. But yes, and I know that experience is common. So I'm
Mhm.
sure our some viewers and some listeners can very much relate to that as well. So thank you for sharing that. And this piece around boundaries as well is resonating with me, and I think it's an important one,
Yeah.
particularly when we are in this social justice world and doing this heavy work. It is very easy for us to burn ourselves out in this way, and not because we don't value ourselves, but because we very much also value um, you know eliminating racism and empowering women, right? These this work is so critical and so important, and very much not not finding that harmony that you're
Mhm.
speaking of can very much be detrimental to ourselves and even those around us, right? In very
Yes.
so. Thank you for bringing that up, and I want to talk a little bit about um, your how your leadership experiences and these lessons, how and your work within this racial equity space, how you have seen it like permeating into your parenthood, because you did mention raising, you know, a teen and a preteen, right, in these times, right? And so I'm wondering what how is this also permeating into that parenthood space, and what is it like to raise Black children as a Black parent, um, as a CEO? You know, how does these worlds merge for you right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say, parenting is probably the hardest job I will ever have. Um, and, part of it, and it's also one of the jobs that is helpful in every other aspect of of my life, right? And so a lot of the lessons that I am learning as a parent, which is humbling, um, translate into other things. So a perfect example is perspective taking. Um, and I think, I grew up in a household that was very much of, whatever my parents said, that's what we did, and that's what it was, and there was no talking back. And I don't have kids like that, and particularly my eldest is not wired that way. And so, it really is about, thinking about, okay, well, what might be his perspective, and how should that come into play, as opposed to it should be just my way because I'm the parent, right? Because that's just not going to work with him. And so, I think that translates particularly in this work because it's important to listen and hear other people's perspective, particularly when it comes to issues of equity. You're not going to change somebody's mind just because you might be able to share a personal story or quote a bunch of data. That's not necessarily going to get people to change their mind, and you have to be okay with that. I know, I've talked to other people who feel like they can convince folks, and that's not my approach to this work. And I think part of that is being a parent, because you can't always tell your kids what to do and think they're going to do it, right? You've got to sometimes agree that you're going to disagree, and sometimes just, sharing your perspective, sharing your stories may eventually get them to change their minds about things. And that's, and how I think about approaching issues of equity. We can be sometimes in very different places, and no matter how you might yell and scream at me, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to change my mind, right? And so being able to have that mindset has been helpful in doing this work, and also realizing that my kids they're little people, right? And they make their own decisions, and when they make great decisions, that's great, and that's them. And when they make poor decisions, that's them, right? And not seeing their decision making, good or bad, as a reflection of me, right? They are individual human beings, and they will make decisions. They will learn from those decisions, hopefully, and more times than not, make better decisions. But when they do bad things, it's not a reflection that my partner and I are bad parents. And when they do good things, it's not a reflection that all of a sudden we're great parents, right? They're their own beings. And I think being able to, keep them separate is also a helpful thing. And is helpful, again, in the workplace, in trying not to take things as a reflection of me and my value and my worth, and am I a good person or a bad person? I will make decisions, some of them, hopefully more good decisions than bad decisions. But that doesn't mean, particularly if it's a bad decision, that I'm a bad person, right? And being able to keep that separate. Or if somebody on the team does something great, that's great. And I don't get to, I could be happy for them, but I can't say, oh, I'm great too, because they're great. And if they make a mistake, well, I'm bad too, right? It doesn't work that way. And I think, again, being a parent helps me to, understand sort of who I am, and allow them to be their separate people, and not get so tied up in the things that they do or don't do because it's a reflection of me. So those are some ways that, my journey as a parent, I think, has been helpful in helping me be a better person in general, and hopefully a better leader for YW Boston.
Yes. This theme of parenting, making you a better person, racial equity work, just generally making you a better person, is one I hear often, particularly from our CEO, Dr. Tia Martin. So thank you for bringing this up as well. So, if you are just joining us, I am here having a lovely discussion with Beth Chandler, CEO of YW Boston. We are talking about the hard work of eliminating racism, empowering women, and sustaining ourselves in this work. So, again, thank you, Beth, for joining us. Thank you for all these gems that you've been dropping up point. So before we shift, I'm wondering if there are any other things you want to share with our community that relate to leadership that anyone, whether they are a CEO of an organization or not, that anyone can apply to their racial equity journey.
Yeah, I think a big lesson for me, particularly around the racial equity piece, was to do my own learning. There was so much I didn't know uh, that being at YW has helped me to learn. And and I would say that prior to being at YW, I didn't know a lot of the terminology. Right? It was really, I had a lot of experiences, and that I knew there was something there, but I had no language to really talk about what was going on. And I think, certainly starting at YW Boston helped me to understand some of the language that exists around, talking about issues of equity, and what are some of the frameworks that are out there. And again, the terminology, because sometimes people are using the same words but have different meanings for them, right? And so being able to understand what is the language and the terminology has been really helpful. And then the history. I think there is so much I didn't know about the history of this country, and certainly the 1619 Project was a perfect example of listening to all of those podcasts and just realizing how much I didn't know about what happened in this country and why it happened, and how many of those things still, permeate what's going on today. And so, just being able to have that knowledge has been so helpful in understanding sort of how things sort of started, right? Because if you don't know where you came from, it's hard to know where you want to go. And so I think understanding that has been really helpful, certainly for me, in thinking about this journey and how to support other people on this journey. And so that's often a question I get from leaders and organizations is, where to start. And the first answer I always say is do your own learning. It isn't important to know what you don't know. I met with a gentleman a few weeks ago who, for the longest time did not have an understanding of systemic racism, didn't really think that anything existed. He's like, slavery's over, we're good. And then somebody shared with him, because one of his, somebody that he really valued, one of his heroes was Thomas Jefferson. And somebody shared with him, well, did you know Thomas Jefferson owned slaves? And I don't even think this person shared anything about, Sally Hemings and all of that, but that he did not know that. And that really, it shocked him and started him on a journey of learning more about, the origins of this country and slavery. And he was shocked by how much was sort of built in to our society. But up until that, he didn't know. And so I think for a lot of people, I don't think it's uncommon for people to think that because we don't have slavery anymore, and you can see people like Oprah, Jay-Z, Robert Smith, who have done extraordinarily well, to say, aren't things good now, right? And it's hard to understand that yes, there are always going to be people who are able uh, to do extraordinarily well, but that there are things that are generally holding most people, and particularly people from marginalized communities, back. And that's hard to see if you go from slavery to now versus seeing how there are still so many disparities. And so again, I come back to being able to do your own work is so important. Um, and then understanding, where can you make a difference? I think often there's this language, and it used to, we used to talk about, groups that were oppressed and those, and then the oppressor, right? And I think that language takes away from people's agency. Even though I might be from oppressed or marginalized communities, it doesn't mean that I don't have agency. It doesn't mean that I don't have power. And so one of the things, at YW, we also help people think about, however they identify, where might they have privilege, where might they have agency and power that they can use, because most of us have it somewhere, right? Even though we might, represent marginalized communities in groups, it doesn't mean that that we're powerless, right? And so how do we help people also reclaim their power, and be able to think about, given the agency I have, the power or privilege I may have in certain spots, how can I leverage that, right? Because there is work that we can all do to eliminate racism, right? To empower women, to eradicate sexism. We all can do something, to move that along. And so how do we help? How do we understand the power that we have to do that?
Hmm. Yes, reclaiming our power. I love that. And I think it speaks very much to that shared leadership
Mm-hmm.
value that you were speaking of earlier. Because again, going back to my days at YW, I do recall very much being given those opportunities to make a decision over the programming that I was charged with. I very much remember those opportunities where questions were always thrown back at me, where it was like, well, what do you think? And how, what are the ideas that you're sitting on right now? And how do you think we should move forward together as a collective? And just those what seems like micro opportunities, but just that shifting of, oh no, like you actually have agency and autonomy here as well, even though you aren't a manager or a CEO or a director or what have you, very much makes a difference. And to receive those micro opportunities consistently as a Black woman in this space, I think is very important, and something that leaders should very much be tuning into, because to your point, we are often stripped away of that power, or even the language that we use, often us away from even thinking about what that power exists and what it could look like for us. So thank you for bringing that up.
How
I
did it feel as a person who, title wise, as it wasn't somebody who had a lofty title in the organization, but had a fair amount of responsibility? How did that feel, to have that and to try to live into that? Was that something that felt comfortable? Did you feel uncomfortable with that? Because not everybody feels comfortable having that accountability, um, for owning something. So I just wanted to know how that felt for you.
Yeah. So earlier you were talking about you mentioned, this imposter experience that we all have, right? Or may go through. And I think very much, particularly in the beginning of my time at YW, I did deal with that a lot. I did have to, one, realize, and with the help of other people, realize like, okay, this is imposter experience that I'm feeling right now. And two, constantly remind myself that this is just something that I need to navigate through, right? So it felt a little uncomfortable. It felt um, just unfamiliar, because I had not been given those opportunities in the past, in previous roles and different places, and having come from, yeah, I won't get into that, but it felt um, however, I think with practice, or not, I know with practice, of just leaning into that unfamiliar territory and really managing my self talk. You know, yeah, managing that self talk. I came to the place where I wore my leadership on my shoulders. I was like, oh yeah, like I am a leader in this space. I'm recognizing it, forget the title and everything. Like I know the agency and autonomy I'm walking in. And I know the responsibility that is on my plate. And I recognize the trust that I've been given to take on this responsibility. So yeah, I'm taking this on. I'm wearing this dress. I'm cool with it, but it took practice. It took practice.
Mhm.
It took constant self management and you know reframing my self talk and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing that because I do think it can be hard for people because I think so often we're often told what the answer is, and so we're sort of waiting for people to say, "Well, just go do this, go do that," and I tend to be, "I don't know. Why don't you tell me? It's your program. You're doing it every day. You tell me what we should do."
That you used to say all the time. That is exactly what you used to say. And I was just like, okay, let me go sit on this, I guess. I to this day I appreciate that. So thank you. I do want to go back to your point around taking ownership over our learning. This is something that all ACEs are constantly emphasizing. We have a platform, intentionallyact.com, that is meant to help folks on this journey
Mhm.
who are desiring and ready to take ownership of their learning in a community oriented space. And you mentioned the 1619 project, which amazing in terms of learning the history of racism, because there's just so much that honestly we don't learn in our traditional educational settings or what have you. And so I'm wondering if there are other resources that you have found helpful in your own personal learning, whether it's something you delved into in the past or something you're currently delving into right now.
Yeah, I just read The Conversation by Dr. Robert Livingston, which is a tremendous book, and his approach mirrors in many ways the way that we approach our work at YW. But just, he's fabulous at being able to weave data and personal stories to and experiences with some of the Fortune 500 companies he's worked with to illustrate his points and make them easy to digest for people who may not be steeped in this work. So that's helpful. I've read the How to Be Antiracist. I think is that book was tremendously helpful to me because I've often struggled with the notion that the definition of racism used to be, or still is for many people, power plus privilege. And I struggled with that notion because it seemed to suggest that people of color couldn't oppress, right? And so maybe I don't want to use the term be racist, but I think there are people of color who have power that aren't using it in a way to help others who are marginalized. And it seemed like there wasn't, until I read that book, a real good way of talking about that and acknowledging that. And so I think his notion, while pretty simple, you're either doing something that's anti-racist or you're not, is helpful to think about, how their power is part of this system, and there are people of color who have power who aren't using it in a way to help others. So those are just some of the things I've read, excuse me, relatively recently that have been helpful. And there's so much out there. There's really no excuse not to be able to find information on a topic that you need to learn more about. I think another one that's becoming something I'm going a little deeper on is anti-Blackness, and how does that differ from racism and some other terms, and really trying to understand how that manifests as well, because there is something to be said, I think, about the people, even if you're a person of color, what happens in those communities for how we think about Blackness and our proximity to it. So some of the things I've read and some of the things I'm thinking about.
Yes, yes. Thank you for bringing up this point of, even if you are a person of color, there's damage that you can be doing
Yes.
there in the world, right? Whether we're talking in the form of internalized whiteness or to
Mm-hmm.
your in the form of anti-blackness. And that is something that we also as a team don't shy away from acknowledging and recognizing. Um, because yeah, we've all been conditioned, right? In
Right.
various, and so there is always work to be doing. And to your point earlier, the journey never ends.
Right.
Um, so let's transition a little bit to sustaining ourselves. I mean, we've been weaving that into our conversation up to this point, but I'm wondering for you, Beth, as a Black queer individual in this space, given the climate in Boston, given the climate in our nation as a whole, what does care look like for you right now?
It's a great question. I'm a big fan of exercise. And so I go to the gym several times a week. That is extraordinarily important for me to do. If I don't do it, my family goes a little crazy because I start going a little crazy. So that's part of it. And also, just being able to be outside in just getting fresh air. I live near the Arboretum. I live in Raleigh, so being able to walk in the Arboretum, being close to nature, that's all helpful. I will share that when last spring and summer, when we realized that that we were going to be working remotely a lot longer than anyone ever anticipated. I became big fans of bird feeders, so have a couple of bird feeders in the backyard. And so just when the weather is nice, sitting outside. When it's not, looking out the window, watching the birds. Like, nature is helpful to me. And then friends, right? Being able to carve out time to, whether it's have beverage together over Zoom, go for a physical, socially distant walk, just to be able to connect with other people and talk about, hey, what's going on, what's going on for you, and does this make sense? I think particularly, I think it's getting a little better now because it seems we're getting a little more light these days. But I think December, January, I just felt like there was a shift for a lot of people, and I think because of it was just so dark. The end of the year, holidays, a lot of traditions couldn't be. It just felt like it was heavy, and I even felt myself feeling a little heavier at that time. And so I think, trying to double down on finding ways to connect with other people to try to get through this, dark time, and dark meaning, winter, COVID, everything. Has been helpful, and I like to read. So finding some, and I read anything and everything. I like to, different genres. So having the opportunity just to sort of disconnect that way, and just, be in a good book, has been helpful too. What about yourself? What are some things that you're doing for self-care?
Oh, thank you for asking. So I will say being clear about my boundaries has been
Mhm.
very important to me during this time. As I mentioned earlier, showing up as auntie and godmother are very important to me. And I also had to recognize, in addition to folks needing me, I also needed me. So setting boundaries has been really, really important to me. Um, Similar to you, tapping out with just reading anything and everything has been amazing. So going back into delving into like short stories has
Mhm.
been exciting. I recently got back into sci-fi, so like tapping
Mhm.
out in those ways has been amazing. Still, you know, having community time in the various ways that I can, with close friends and whatnot has been great. And I've really delved into my yoga practice lately.
Ah.
Yeah. So I've been practicing on off and on for about 2 years, but the past year I've like really been disciplined and like it's really shifted. It's really shifted for me. So yeah, those are the main ways I've been caring for myself.
Okay. And I'm sure my minister will be upset if I didn't mention church. So we do Zoom church. And so I've often found that when I'm sending a message to staff, there is usually some influence from a Sunday sermon that somehow slips into. So church has been very helpful.
Mm, I love that. Yes, love that. Um, so in our last couple of minutes, I have some uh rapid fire questions for you. I just made that
Okay.
up. Okay, so my first question for you is, what is one book that will always be on your shelf?
The Bible.
Love it, love it, love it. Second question, what is one song that will always be on your playlist?
Aretha Franklin. I'm not sure. I can't. I'm terrible at titles, but there's one song by Aretha, which when I listen to the words, it's tough because it's about she wants to get this guy back, but the song itself, if I don't pay too much attention to the lyrics, I just think the song is great.
It's the like rhythm and cadence for you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. Love it. Third and final question. In 30 seconds or less, what would you love to see come from your work?
I would love to see that there are more organizations in Boston that have real diversity in leadership positions, and so that there are more women, particularly women of color, that are in senior leadership positions and decision making decisions. If that happens, then I feel like we've been successful.
Thank you, Beth. It has been lovely having you here with me, reconnecting after so many years. Thank you all for joining us, wherever you are joining us from. If you'd like to learn more about YW Boston, please explore their site, ywboston.org. If you're interested in delving deeper into this work, please join us, all aces, at intentionallyact.com. And per usual, please return back here soon for another episode of Intentionally Act Live. I am Jennifer Fortune. It's been amazing having you here, and we will see you soon.